Welcome to Agonies of Our Motherland, where hidden stories of slavery become public. If you are new here, kindly join our community by subscribing to our channel. So let's dive into the story. The wind didn't just blow that night, it answered. August 1856, Low Country, Carolina. A few miles outside Beaufort, midnight, the cotton stood tall and white under a sky gone completely black, as if the stars had fled. Then the first gust came sharp, deliberate like a hand closing around the throat of the world trees bent sideways. Live oak moss whipped like hair in a rage, lightning carved open the dark, and in the sudden flash you could see her Juba 35, barefoot in the middle of the rows, arms raised high, palms open to the heavens, head thrown back, hair lashing across her face like it was trying to tear itself free. The storm didn't swirl around her, it obeyed her. No one on that plantation had ever known she could do this. Not the master, not the overseers, not even the women who shared her cabin and whispered prayers after the bell rang. They thought the wind simply loved her. They were wrong. She was calling it home to understand how a woman who spent her days on her knees, coaxing roses out of red clay, became the thing that broke the sky. You have to walk those same rows at dawn when the heat was already rising, and the air smelled of damp earth and distant marsh. Every morning, Juba moved through the garden behind the quarters like it was her own small kingdom. Sweetgrass okra collards, the master's wife's precious tea roses that no one else was allowed to touch her hands, were cracked and dark from the soil. But they moved with a gentleness that made the children run to her after the first bell. Auntie Juba, they called her, pressing their faces into her skirt, breathing in the scent of crushed herbs and sweat, and something older, something green and secret. She taught them little songs in the old Gullah tongue, low and rhythmic, the kind their grandmothers had brought across the water when an overseer came too close with his whip. The breeze would shift just enough to knock his hat off, just enough to make him curse the weather and walk away. They never guessed the wind was hers, but the wind had always been listening. She had learned that at 16 during a hurricane that peeled the roofs off the cabins and drowned half the rice fields on the Sea Islands. Her grandmother, old Ma Phoebe, the conjure woman everyone feared and needed, pulled her into the corner of the cabin while the wind screamed outside. The old woman pressed a small leather pouch into Juba's hand. Graveyard dirt, 3 shark teeth, a single black feather. Her voice was barely a whisper over the roar. The wind remembers pain, child. When yours gets too heavy, call it. But only when you have nothing left to lose. Juba had kept that pouch under the floorboards of her cabin for 20 years. She had never opened it. Not when the master first took her at 17. Not when her first baby was born dead. Not when fever took her husband 2 winters later. She kept it hidden because she still had something left to lose. Their names were Moses and Ruthie, 8 years old, born on the same full moon. Dark curls, bright laughter that cut through the heat like cool water. They followed her through the garden every evening. Small hands helping tie sweetgrass bundles. Small voices learning the songs she sang low so the big house wouldn't hear at night. They curled against her like they were still one skin, breathing the same rhythm. She would rock them in the dark and whisper the same promise every time if they ever come for you. Listen for the wind, it will carry my voice, it will find you. They thought it was just Mama telling stories. Then came the morning. The story stopped being a story. August heat lay thick over the plantation like a wet blanket. Master Harlan Voss stood on the wide porch in his linen suit, counting coins in his palm, while 2 Georgia traders waited in the yard. Moses and Ruthie were pulled from the garden, where they'd been helping Juba pick okra. Their wrists were bound before they understood what was happening. They screamed her name, Mama, Auntie Juba, as they were dragged toward the wagon. Juba stood frozen in the dust arms at her sides, eyes locked on her children until the wagon disappeared down the red clay road. She did not cry, she did not beg, she did not make a sound. The sky went perfectly still. No birds, no breeze. Even the leaves stopped moving. That silence was the last gentle thing the plantation would ever feel that night. She knelt alone in her cabin. She pulled up the loose board. The leather pouch was still there, dry and waiting. She poured the graveyard dirt in a careful circle, placed the shark teeth at north, south, east, west, laid the black feather in the center. Then she spoke the words her grandmother had given her, slow, deliberate, the old gullah rolling off her tongue like it had been waiting 20 years to be free. The candle flame bent sideways. A leaf on the floor spun in place outside the first. Real gust rattled the shutters, soft at first, then harder. She smiled in the dark for the first time since the wagon left. She didn't ask for justice. She asked for memory. And the wind remembered for 3 nights she practiced each night. The wind grew bolder. A candle flame danced. When she raised her hand, dust devils spun in the yard. An overseer's horse bolted for no reason and threw him into the mud. Laundry tore from the lines and scattered like warnings across the cotton rows. The master's prize stallion was found the next morning with its neck twisted at an impossible angle. Eyes wide in terror, no one connected the quiet Gardiner to any of it. They blamed the weather. They always blamed the weather on the 4th night. She stopped testing. She walked into the cotton field at midnight, barefoot arms already half raised. The clouds were waiting, thick black, boiling low over the big white house. She lifted her hands all the way, fingers spread wide, and spoke one word. Remember. The wind answered with a roar. Trees snapped like matchsticks. The big house roof peeled away in sheets. Lightning struck the master's bedroom window. Glass exploding outward, Harlan Voss stumbled out onto the gallery in his nightshirt, screaming, only to be lifted off his feet by a wall of air, and slammed backward into an oak with a sound like breaking bone. One by one, the white men who had stood by, who had counted coins, who had dragged her babies away, were claimed crushed by falling timbers, drowned in the sudden floodwater rising from the river, struck by lightning that seemed to hunt them, finding them. No matter where they hid, the quarters were untouched inside the cabins. The people huddled together, listening to the wind howl, a name they had only ever whispered, Juba, by morning. The storm was gone, the sky was clear and innocent. 17 white bodies lay scattered across the wreckage. The big house was a gutted shell. The cotton fields were flattened in the exact shape of a woman's open hands. Juba was never seen again. Some say she walked into the marsh and let the tide take her. Others swear they still see her silhouette on stormy nights, arms raised, hair whipping, standing where the big house used to be. The twins were never found, but every August, when the air grows thick and the heat lies heavy and the sky turns that particular shade of black, a sudden wind rises sharp. Searching angry, the old folks on St. Helena Island still tell their grandchildren to listen. That's Juba, they say, still looking for her babies. And on those nights, if you stand very still in what's left of the cotton rows, you can feel it brush your face like a mother's hand. Cool, fierce, and never ever forgetting the storm passed, the house fell. But the wind never forgot her name, and sometimes when the breeze whispers through the fields just right, you can still hear it calling Juba. Dawn light spills over the plantation like spilled milk across red clay, the air already thick with the promise of heat, and the low hum of insects waking in the grass. Juba kneels in the garden behind the quarters, her knees sinking into the damp earth, her hands moving with the same quiet precision she had used every morning for 15 years, planting sweetgrass in neat rows, tying okra vines to stakes, coaxing the master's wife's tea roses to bloom without a single thorn out of place. The scent of crushed herbs rises around her, sharp and green, mingling with the faint salt from the nearby marsh, and the sweeter undertone of the roses she alone has trusted tend, because the mistress says her hands are gentle enough not to bruise the petals, and Juba never corrects her, never says that gentleness is the mask she wears to survive, because underneath it, her fingers know how to snap a stem, how to pull a root, how to make something live or let it die, and the children sense it. Without knowing, they run to her as soon as the first bell fades, their bare feet kicking up dust, calling, Auntie Juba, in voices still high with sleep. She smiles the same soft smile she has given them since they could toddle over the threshold, slips okra seeds into small palms, teaches them to press the soil just so, to whisper thank you to the earth the way her grandmother taught her. And when they sit cross-legged around her, she hums low gullah songs, the old ones that rise and fall like breath in the wind. Songs their own mothers sing after dark, but softer here in daylight, so the big house won't hear, and the children sway to the rhythm, their small bodies leaning into her skirt, breathing in the scent of her sweat, in herbs, and something deeper, something ancient they cannot name yet. And in those moments, Juba feels the weight of them, all the living children still here. The ones already sold, the ones yet to come, pressing against her ribs like the twins once did. And her survival instinct, the one that has kept her breathing, kept her head down, kept her voice low, flares briefly then quiets. Because these children are not hers to lose, not yet. And she will not let the fear show, not in her hands, not in her eyes, not in the songs she teaches them. And when the overseer approaches, boots crunching the path, whip coiled at his hip, the breeze shifts subtle, almost lazy, lifting dust in a small spiral, knocking his hat from his head into the dirt. He curses, swats at the air, blames the weather, stomps away red-faced, and Juba never looks up, never flinches, never lets the smile slip from her face. Because the wind has always been listening to her since she was a girl, since her grandmother pressed the pouch into her palm during that hurricane night, since the old woman whispered, "The wind remembers pain, child." And Juba has spent 20 years pretending it was just a story, just a comfort, just a way to keep the fear at bay. But every time the breeze moves when no one else feels it, every time a leaf spins in place when the air should be still, every time an overseer's lash is knocked aside by a sudden gust, she feels it. The power coiled in her chest like a sleeping snake, patient waiting. And she wonders in the quiet corners of her mind what it would feel like to stop pretending, to stop hiding, to let it uncoil, to let it howl. And the thought terrifies her because she knows once she calls it, there will be no taking it back. No going back to the Gardiner who smiles and hums and teaches children songs. And yet the thought also steadies her, like the feel of the soil under her nails, like the scent of sweet grass after rain, because the wind has never betrayed her, never turned on her, never forgotten her name, and she has never asked it for more than protection. Small, quiet things, a hat blown off a candle flame, bent to fever, cooled by a sudden cool draft. But now with Moses and Ruthie's voices still echoing in her ears. Mama Auntie Juba as the wagon rolled away. Now the question sits heavier. What if I asked for more? What if I asked for everything? And in the hours she spends on her knees pruning roses, pulling weeds, she feels the answer rising not in words, but in sensation, the breeze brushing her cheek, the way she used to brush her twins' curls, the leaves rustling like small hands reaching the clouds, gathering low on the horizon like they are listening, like they are waiting. And she knows the gentle breeze that has protected her all these years has been listening since she was a girl, and it has been waiting for a reason to howl, waiting for the day. Her pain grew too heavy for silence, waiting for the moment she finally decided that protection was no longer enough, that survival was no longer the goal, that reckoning had become the only path left. And as the sun climbs higher and the heat presses down and the children scatter back to their tasks, Juba stands slowly, brushes the dirt from her skirt, lifts her face to the sky and feels the first faint shift in the air, the first whisper of what is coming. Not a storm, yet not even a gust, just a promise, a memory, a mother's love turning sharp and searching and ready to answer when she finally calls its name. Flashback to 1842, the year the big storm came to the Sea Islands when Juba was 16, and the sky turned the color of wet slate, and the wind screamed like every soul it had ever taken was riding it home. She huddled in the corner of the cabin with her grandmother, Ma Phoebe, the old root woman, whose hands were gnarled like live oak roots, and whose eyes held every hurricane she had outlived. The walls shook, the roof groaned, palm fronds slapped against the shutters like desperate hands, and rain drove through the cracks in horizontal sheets, soaking the dirt floor, turning it to mud that clung to their ankles. Ma Phoebe did not flinch, did not pray out loud. She simply pulled Juba close, wrapped one arm around her shoulders, and with the other reached into the small wooden box she kept under the sleeping pallet, the box that held things no overseer ever saw, things that could get a woman sold downriver or worse, and from it she drew a small leather pouch worn soft from years of handling the leather, cracked in places, but still tight. Still secret, she pressed it into Juba's palm, closed the girl's fingers around it tight, and leaned in so close her breath smelled of sassafras and sea salt. "The wind remembers pain, child," she whispered low enough that even the storm could not steal the words. "When yours gets too heavy to carry alone, call it, but only when you have nothing left to lose." Juba felt the weight of the pouch, small but heavy, like a promise or a warning inside. She could feel the shape of things, graveyard dirt from the old burying ground behind the praise house. 3 shark teeth from the beach where the ancestors first stepped into this land. A single black feather from a crow that had landed on Ma Phoebe's windowsill the day her own daughter was sold away. And Juba's heart hammered against her ribs because she understood without being told that this was not just a charm. This was a door. This was permission to become something more than what the master allowed. And the fear rose in her sharp and cold because she had seen what happened to women who stepped beyond the lines. Women who spoke too loud, who looked too long, who dared to want more than survival. And yet beneath the fear, something else stirred. Something hot and quiet, like the first ember in dry grass. The knowledge that the wind had always been there, brushing her cheek when she cried alone in the quarters, cooling her fevered skin when she was small, lifting her hair when she ran through the fields laughing with other children. And now she knew it was not random. It was listening, it was waiting, it was hers if she ever dared to claim it. Ma Phoebe held her gaze steady even as the cabins shuddered around them. The old woman's eyes dark and deep like the marsh at midnight. "You keep this hidden child," she said. "You keep it until the day comes when hiding hurts more than using it. And when that day comes, you speak the words I taught you, and you do not look back." Juba knotted her throat too tight for words. She slipped the pouch into the hem of her skirt, sewed it in with trembling fingers. And for the rest of that long night, as the hurricane raged outside, she felt the weight against her thigh like a second heartbeat, a reminder that she was not as powerless as the whip and the chain wanted her to believe. And when the storm finally passed, leaving the fields flooded, the rice drowned, the roofs torn, and the air strangely still, she walked out into the wreckage with the other survivors and felt the breeze rise gentle again, brushing her face like an apology or a vow. And she knew the wind had not forgotten her. It had simply gone quiet, waiting for her to grow, waiting for her pain to ripen, waiting for the moment she would have nothing left to lose and everything left to reclaim. Back in 1856, the pouch still rested under the loose floorboard in her cabin. Untouched for 14 years, the leather a little more worn, the contents still dry, still potent, still patient. She had never opened it. Not when the master first forced himself on her at 17. Not when her first child came stillborn in a blood-soaked pallet. Not when fever took her husband 2 winters later. Leaving her alone with the twins, she had kept it hidden for the same reason she kept her heart hidden. 2 small reasons who still needed her alive. Moses and Ruthie, whose laughter filled the garden, whose small hands helped her tie sweetgrass, whose voices called her name in the dark. When nightmares came, she could not risk calling the wind, not when it might answer too loudly, not when it might take more than she was ready to give. But now, with their voices echoing in her ears, Mama Auntie Juba, as the wagon rolled away now, with their small faces turned back toward her in the dust now, with the silence after their screams heavier than any storm she had ever known. The pouch felt different, heavier, hotter, like it had been waiting for this exact moment. Like Ma Phoebe had known all along that the day would come when the pain grew too heavy to carry alone. And Juba knelt in the dark cabin, the lantern turned low, the air thick with the scent of pine smoke and damp earth. She pried up the floorboard with shaking fingers, lifted the pouch, felt its familiar weight in her palm, and for the first time in 14 years, she allowed herself to wonder what it would feel like to open it, to speak the words, to let the wind howl her name. And the fear came again, sharp and familiar. But this time it was laced with something else, something fierce and final. A mother's certainty that protection was no longer enough, that survival was no longer the goal, that the only way to keep her promise to her twins was to become the promise itself, to become the wind that would find them, no matter how far they had been taken. And as she untied the leather cord, as the graveyard dirt spilled into her palm, as the shark teeth caught the faint lantern light, as the black feather trembled in her breath, she felt the air in the cabin shift, subtle at first, then deliberate. The candle flame bending sideways, the dust on the floor stirring into small spirals, the shutters rattling softly as if the wind outside were leaning in, listening, waiting for her to say the words. And in that moment, Juba understood that the gentle breeze that had protected her all these years had never been gentle. It had been patient, it had been waiting, it had been hers, and now it was time to let it howl. The sun was already climbing when the twins first opened their eyes 8 years ago, born under the same full moon that hung fat and silver over the rice fields, their cries rising together like two notes of the same song. Moses came first, dark curls plastered to his scalp, small fists already clenched, as if ready to fight the world. Ruthie followed moments later, quieter, but no less fierce, her tiny hand finding her brother's, even before her eyes opened, and from that first breath they were never apart. They slept curled against each other in the same pallet, their breathing falling into the same rhythm, their small chests rising and falling, as one in Juba would watch them in the dark, her own breath slowing to match theirs. Her hands hovering above them, not quite touching, as if afraid the warmth of her palms might wake them from whatever dream they shared. And in those quiet hours she felt the weight of them settle into her bones, not as burden but as anchor. The reason she rose before dawn, the reason she smiled for the overseer, the reason she kept the pouch hidden under the floorboards, because these two small lives were the only things she had ever truly owned, and she would die before she let them be taken. And every evening after the bell rang, they ran to her across the dusty yard, their bare feet kicking up red clay, their voices high and bright. Auntie Juba, they would crash into her skirt, press their faces against her legs, breathe in the scent of sweet grass and earth and sweat, and she would kneel, scoop them both into her arms, feel their small hearts beating against her chest, their curls tickling her chin. And for those few moments, the plantation, the whip, the big house, all of it fell away, and there was only this, only them, only the smell of their hair, the sound of their laughter, the way their fingers tangled in hers, like they were still connected by the same cord that had once joined them in her womb and in the garden. They were her shadows trailing behind her as she worked, Moses, always the bolder one, tugging at sweet grass to show her how strong he was, already tying clumsy knots with his small fingers, while Ruthie watched serious and careful, then copied him exactly, her tongue poking between her teeth the way Juba's did when she concentrated, and Juba would praise them both, press okra seeds into their palms, teach them how to press the soil just so, how to whisper thank you to the earth, how to listen to the wind when it moved through the leaves, because she wanted them to know the same things her grandmother had taught her, wanted them to feel the world beneath their feet, not just as dirt, but as something alive, something that remembered. And every night when the lantern was turned low and the other cabins grew quiet, she pulled them close, wrapped them in her arms, rocked them slowly on the sleeping pallet, their small bodies fitting perfectly against hers. Moses on her left, Ruthie on her right, their heads tucked under her chin, their breath warm against her neck, and she would hum the old gullah lullaby, low and steady, the one that rose and fell like waves on the marsh, the one Ma Phoebe had sung to her when she was small and when their breathing deepened and their small hands loosened in sleep. She would lean down, press up her lips to their foreheads one after the other, and whisper the same promise every night. If they ever try to take you, listen for the wind, it will come for you, I promise. And sometimes Moses would stir, half awake, mumble mama, and she would smooth his curls, whisper, yes, baby, the wind knows your name. It will find you anywhere. And Ruthie would sigh in her sleep, turn her face closer to Juba's chest, as if already listening, and Juba would hold them tighter. Feel their small hearts beating against hers. Feel the love so fierce it hurt. Feel the fear so deep it burned, because she knew the world they lived in, knew the master's eyes when he looked at growing children, knew the traders who came every season with their ledgers, and their coins, knew that two strong 8-year-olds were worth more upriver than they were worth to their mother. And every time she whispered that promise, she felt the pouch under the floorboards like a second heartbeat, like a question she did not yet have to answer. And she prayed every night that the day would never come, that she would never have to open it, never have to call the wind, never have to find out whether her promise was just a mother's comfort or something more, and yet deep inside where the fear and the love lived tangled together. She knew the day was coming. She could feel it in the way the overseer watched Moses lift a heavy basket in the garden, in the way the master counted heads at the gate, in the way the breeze brushed her cheek lately sharper than before, as if reminding her that it was still listening, still waiting, still hers, and she held her twins closer, rocked them, slower, hummed a lullaby longer, because she knew time was running thin, and the promise she whispered every night was no longer just words. It was preparation. It was rehearsal. It was the only shield she had left to give them, and every time their small voices answered sleepily, "Mama," she answered back, "Yes, baby. The wind knows your name," and she prayed they would never have to find out how true that was. But even as she prayed, she felt the air in the cabin shift subtle, almost tender, the breeze slipping through the cracks in the wall, brushing her face the way she used to brush their curls. And she knew the wind was already practicing, already learning their names, already waiting for the morning, when the master would decide two strong children were worth more upriver than they were worth to their mother. The sun had barely cleared the live oaks when the dust started rising on the red clay road, two wagons rolling slow heavy with the weight of business. Master Harlan Voss already waited on the wide porch, his linen suit crisp, despite the heat coins glinting in his palm as he counted them again and again, like a man reassuring himself the numbers were right. Two Georgia traders stepped down from the wagons, boots crunching gravel. Broad hats shading eyes that scanned the quarters the way buyers scan livestock. They spoke low to Voss, nodded once, and the overseer was sent to fetch the children. Juba was in the garden when she heard the bell, not the morning bell, but the sharp one that meant everyone stop what you're doing and line up. She straightened slowly, felt the soil still clinging to her palms, felt the breeze die completely, as if the air itself had drawn in a breath and held it. Moses and Ruthie were beside her, small hands full of okra pods. Their faces turned up to hers smiling, until they saw her expression change, until they saw the overseer striding toward them, whip coiled but not raised. "Not yet," he barked their names, "Moses, Ruthie. Come now, the master wants you," and Juba's arms went around them instinctively, pulling them close. Her body a shield, her heart slamming against her ribs so hard she thought the children could feel it through her dress. But the overseer's hand closed on Moses' shoulder, the other on Ruthie's arm, and he pulled. They stumbled backward, small feet dragging in the dirt, their okra pods scattering like green tears. And then the screaming started, high, sharp, raw. "Mama, Auntie Juba, Mama." The sound cut through the morning like a blade through cloth. Juba lunged forward, hands reaching, but the overseer shoved her back hard enough to knock her to her knees, dust rising around her like smoke. She scrambled up again, arms outstretched, but two more men appeared. Voss's drivers, thick-shouldered. They grabbed her wrists, twisted them behind her back, held her in place while the twins were dragged toward the wagons. Moses twisting violently, kicking at shins, Ruthie crying, "Mama, Mama, please don't let them take us." And Juba's mouth opened, but no sound came, only a silent scream that tore through her chest. Her lungs burning her throat, closing around the words she could not speak. Because if she spoke it, if she begged, if she broke, the master would win more than he already had. And she would not give him, that she would not give him her voice, not today. The twins were lifted into the wagon, wrists bound with rough rope, their small bodies pressed together, faces turned back toward her, eyes wide with terror, mouths open in one continuous wail. "Mama, Mama, Mama," and Juba locked eyes with them, held their gaze, even as the drivers climbed up, even as the reins snapped, even as the wagons lurched forward, wheels crunching over the scattered okra pods, even as the dust rose thicker and thicker until the road curved and the wagons disappeared around the bend. Taking her children, taking her heart, taking every reason she had ever had to keep breathing, and she stood frozen in the dust, knees, locked arms still half extended toward the empty road. Eyes burning but dry, no tears, no sound, no movement. The overseer released her wrists, shoved her toward the quarters, muttered something about getting back to work, and walked away. The other men followed. Voss returned to his porch coin still in his palm, counting again as if nothing had changed, as if two children had not just been torn from their mother, as if the air itself had not noticed. But the air had noticed. The birds in the live oaks went silent. The insects in the grass stopped their humming. The leaves stopped rustling. The breeze that had always brushed Juba's cheek like a promise died completely dead. Flat silence, no wind, no sound, no breath. The sky above turned perfectly still, heavy and watchful like a held breath before a scream, and Juba stood there in the center of that silence, dust settling on her shoulders, on her hair, on her cracked lips, her hands slowly lowering to her sides, fingers curling into fists, not in rage, not yet, but in something colder, something deeper, something that had been waiting 14 years under a floorboard, waiting for the day the pain became too heavy to carry alone. And in that silence she felt it, the pouch calling to her from the cabin, the graveyard dirt, the shark teeth, the black feather, all of them humming like a second pulse, like the twins' heartbeats still echoing in her chest. And she knew the promise she had whispered every night. If they ever try to take you, the wind will come for you. I promise. That promise was no longer a comfort. It was a vow. It was a debt the world owed her, and she was ready to collect. That silence was the last gentle thing the plantation ever heard from her before the screaming began. Midnight in her cabin, the lantern turned so low it barely pushed back the dark. The air inside thick with the smell of pine smoke and red clay, and the faint metallic tang of fear that had settled in her throat since the wagon disappeared. Juba knelt on the dirt floor, knees pressing into the cool packed earth. Her skirt fanned out around her like spilled ink. She reached under the pallet, pried up the loose board with fingers that did not shake, because shaking would mean doubt, and doubt was no longer allowed. The leather pouch came up into her palm, familiar as her own heartbeat, heavier now, as if it had absorbed every tear she had refused to shed, every scream she had swallowed, every moment she had stood frozen while her children were dragged away. She untied the cord slowly, deliberately. The graveyard dirt spilled into her palm, black and fine like the night itself. She poured it in a careful circle around her knees. The circle small but complete, a boundary between who she had been and what she was about to become. She placed the 3 shark teeth at north, south, east, west, the points catching the faint lantern light like small blades ready to cut. She laid the black feather in the center, its edges trembling as if it already felt the coming wind. She closed her eyes, breathed in the silence, the dead, flat silence that had followed the twins' screams, the silence that had wrapped the plantation like a shroud. And in that silence she felt the first faint stir, not outside but inside her chest, the place where love and rage had tangled so tight for so long. They had become one thing. She opened her mouth and spoke the words Ma Phoebe had given her. Low, slow, the old gullah rolling off her tongue like river water over stones. Wind that remembers, pain wind that carries names. Wind that knows the taste of blood spilled on this land. Come listen, come answer, come howl for what was taken. The first answer was soft, almost shy, a breeze slipping through the cracks in the cabin walls, brushing her cheek, cool and tentative, like a child testing. If it was safe to come closer, the candle flame bent sideways, slow and graceful. A leaf that had fallen from the roof beam spun in place, lazy circles on the dirt floor. Juba opened her eyes, watched the flame dance, watched the leaf turn, felt the air move across her skin, and for the first time since the wagon rolled away, she smiled. Not wide, not joyful, but small, sharp, certain, the smile of a woman who has just heard the lock turn in a door she thought she would never open. She raised one hand, palm up, finger spread the breeze, strengthened, curled around her wrist like a bracelet, lifted her hair from her neck. She exhaled and the candle flame stretched longer, thinner. Then snapped back, she inhaled and the leaf spun faster. Tighter, she whispered. Moses, Ruthie, listen, the wind knows your names, and outside the shutters rattled once softly, as if something large and patient had leaned in to hear better. She did not ask for justice. She asked for vengeance, not the clean kind, not the kind that comes with courts or papers or apologies. The raw kind, the kind that answers blood with storm, that answers silence with scream, that answers loss with everything the sky has left to give. And the wind heard her. It answered louder now, pushing against the cabin walls, making the timbers groan, making the lantern flicker, making the dirt circles swirl in small eddies around her knees. She felt it move through her like breath through lungs that had been holding for 14 years, like blood rushing back into limbs that had been bound too long, like the first real cry after a birth that had almost killed her. She rose slowly to her feet, arms at her sides but palms still open. The breeze followed, rose with her, swirled around her ankles, climbed her legs, wrapped her waist, lifted the hem of her skirt. She stepped to the door, pushed it open. The night outside was black and still, but the moment she crossed the threshold, the wind rose sharper, colder, carrying the scent of marsh and salt and distant rain. She walked into the yard, bare feet on cool dirt, raised both hands, fingers wide, and spoke again. Remember, and the gust came sudden, strong enough to rattle the empty water bucket against the cabin wall. Strong enough to send dust devils spinning across the yard, strong enough to make the live oaks sigh and bend. She stood there in the dark, smiling wider now. The smile of a woman who has just discovered her voice is louder than the whip. Louder than the chain, louder than the coins counted on the porch, louder than the silence that tried to swallow her children's screams. And in that moment, she knew the pouch had never been a charm. It had been a key, and she had just turned it. The wind was no longer gentle, no longer protective. It was learning her name, learning her pain, learning her rage, learning how to howl. And over the next 3 nights, she practiced each night, going deeper each night, asking more each night, letting the wind stretch its muscles until the candle flame no longer bent, but whipped sideways, until the leaf no longer spun, but flew, until the shutters no longer rattled, but slammed, until the air inside the cabin tasted of ozone and salt and something wilder, something alive, something hers. And every night she whispered their names. Moses, Ruthie, listen, the wind is coming for you, I promise. And every night the wind answered louder, clearer, hungrier, until by the 3rd night the cabin walls trembled. The lantern blew out, the dirt circle lifted into a small whirlwind, and Juba stood in the center, arms wide, head thrown back, laughing not with joy but with the cold, certain knowledge that she had crossed over, that there was no going back, that the quiet Gardiner, who smiled for children and hummed low songs, was gone, and what remained was something older, something fiercer, something that had waited 14 years to be born. And now that it was born, it would not be quiet. It would not be gentle. It would howl, and the wind learned her name. It learned it well. As the storm passed and the sky slowly cleared, what remained was not just wreckage scattered across the plantation. It was silence, the kind that settles when something irreversible has happened. The master's house stood torn and broken, its authority reduced to splintered wood and soaked earth, and the woman who had spent years tending his gardens was nowhere to be found. Some swore she had fled into the night before the winds reached their peak. Others whispered she walked calmly into the rain, as if answering a call only she could hear. In the weeks that followed, the story twisted and spread. Overseers blamed coincidence. Ministers called it divine punishment, and the enslaved spoke of justice carried on thunder. Whether the storm was summoned by ritual, faith, rage, or simply chance would never be proven. But the legend endured because it gave voice to something history often tried to bury: the quiet power of those forced into silence. Her name faded from records, yet her story survived in murmurs and memory, a haunting reminder that resistance did not always arrive with weapons or rebellion. Sometimes it arrived with wind, with darkness, with the sky itself turning against those who believed they could never fall.